In the early years of the 16th century, Spain did not merely rule an empire. Spain was the world, from the icy ports of Flanders to the burning jungles of the Americas. From Naples to Manila, the Spanish crown presided over a realm so vast that contemporaries struggled to describe it. They reached for the divine. They said the sun never set on Spanish lands. They said God himself had chosen Castile to carry civilization, faith, and order across the globe. Gold flowed into Seville like a river without an end. Silver poured from the mountains of the New World, carried across the Atlantic in fleets guarded by cannon and prayer. The royal treasuries overflowed. Spanish kings spoke not in the language of limits, but in the language of destiny. To their rivals, Spain looked invincible. France watched with envy. England watched with hunger. The rising Dutch Republic watched with calculation. They saw Spanish armies marching in perfect formation, Spanish galleons dominating the seas, Spanish banners flying over continents they could not yet reach. But behind the glittering facade, behind the heavy velvet curtains of royal palaces, a quieter force was already at work, one that would not announce itself with cannon fire or rebellion. It came in the form of ink on parchment, of clauses, signatures, and promises that seemed harmless at the time. Spain believed its greatest challenge was military, holding territory, suppressing rebellion, defending Catholic Europe from heresy and foreign threat. What it failed to understand was far more dangerous. Empires do not always fall to enemies at the gate. Sometimes they collapse because of the rules they agree to follow. At the heart of Spain's future decline was not a battle lost or a city burned, but a trade system quietly accepted, one that reshaped how Spain earned, spent, and depended on wealth. It was a system that rewarded short-term abundance while hollowing out the foundations of power beneath it. For 3 centuries, the consequences of that agreement would echo across generations. Spain would fight wars it could not afford. It would borrow money it could never repay. It would watch rivals grow rich, industrial, and modern, while it remained trapped in a cycle of extraction and debt. And all the while, Spaniards would ask the same question. How could the richest empire in history become one of Europe's poorest great powers? The answer does not begin with defeat. It begins with confidence, with abundance. And with a trade agreement no one believed could ever destroy an empire, in the decades that followed Spain's rise, wealth became not a tool but an assumption. Silver from the Americas arrived in such vast quantities that it reshaped the Spanish imagination. Every year, fleets crossed the Atlantic carrying metal torn from the mountains of Potosi and Zacatecas. The numbers were staggering. Never before had a European power commanded such a flow of raw wealth. To the Spanish crown, this seemed like proof of permanence. Why build factories when silver could buy anything? Why nurture merchants when treasure arrived already minted by fate? Spain did not think like a trading nation. It thought like a chosen one. Across Europe, other powers learned hard lessons from scarcity. England denied easy wealth, invested in shipbuilding, manufacturing, and finance. The Dutch, fighting for survival against a far stronger empire, perfected trade networks, banking systems, and commercial law. They learned to make money work. Spain did not need to learn those lessons, or so it believed. Instead of reinvesting its wealth into productive capacity textiles, shipyards, metalworking, infrastructure, Spain spent on wars in Italy and the Low Countries. It spent on royal courts dripping with ceremony. It spent on armies to defend Catholic orthodoxy across Europe. Silver became a shortcut, a way to postpone difficult decisions. But silver has a dangerous property. It moves. Spanish treasure did not stay in Spain. It flowed outward almost as quickly as it arrived. Spain imported weapons, cloth, ships, and food from foreign producers. Dutch merchants carried Spanish silver in their pockets. Genoese bankers collected Spanish interest payments. English traders sold manufactured goods in exchange for bullion. Spain was rich, but it was not productive. This imbalance created a quiet dependency. Spain needed the world to sell to it because it no longer made enough itself. The empire was not building an economy. It was financing one belonging to others. At the same time, inflation began to eat away at Spanish society. As silver flooded markets, prices rose. Wages lagged behind. Domestic producers found it harder to compete with cheaper foreign goods bought with Spanish money. The crown responded not by reforming, but by doubling down. Loans replaced revenue. Borrowing replaced planning. The monarchy assumed future silver would always arrive to cover present debts. When shortages appeared, they were treated as temporary. When costs rose, they were dismissed as the price of greatness. Spain had fallen into a familiar imperial trap, mistaking cash flow for strength. And then came the moment that sealed this illusion into policy, not through conquest, but through agreement. A trade system emerged that formalized Spain's role not as a manufacturer or commercial innovator, but as a supplier of raw wealth and a consumer of foreign goods. It looked efficient, it looked profitable, it looked safe. In reality, it locked Spain into an economic identity it would struggle to escape for the next 300 years. The empire did not notice the chains forming. After all, they were made of silver. The agreement that would shape Spain's fate did not arrive with fanfare. There was no dramatic signing ceremony, no sense of danger, no warnings carved into the margins. It emerged gradually through contracts, privileges, monopolies, and concessions woven into the fabric of Spain's imperial trade system so subtly that few questioned it. At its core was a simple idea. Spain would control sources of wealth, while others would handle its circulation. The Spanish crown tightly regulated trade with its American colonies. Officially, all commerce was to pass through a single Port-Savel. Later, Cadiz, under the supervision of royal bureaucrats, in theory, this ensured control. In practice, it created bottlenecks, corruption, and inefficiency on a massive scale. Spain lacked ships, Spain lacked skilled merchants, Spain lacked modern financial institutions, so it outsourced them. Foreign traders, especially Genoese, Dutch, and later English, were granted access to Spanish markets through licenses, exemptions, and informal arrangements. Genoese bankers financed Spanish wars, Dutch merchants carried Spanish silver, Flemish, and Italian manufacturers supplied goods to Spanish colonies, often re-exported under Spanish flags in name only. Spain retained sovereignty but surrendered function. The most consequential element of this system was Spain's dependence on Asian toast contracts granted to private financiers, often foreign. In exchange, these contractors were paid not in productivity, but in guaranteed access to silver revenues. It was a trade agreement without borders, without a single signature, but with devastating clarity. Spain traded control over its economic future for immediate convenience. Every war Spain fought deepened this dependency. Every conflict required loans. Every loan required guarantees. And the only guarantee Spain reliably offered was future silver, not yet mined, not yet shipped, not yet taxed. When silver shipments were delayed by storms, piracy, or rebellion, Spain defaulted, again and again. By the mid-16th century, Spain had already declared bankruptcy multiple times, an extraordinary fact for the richest empire on earth. Each default did not end the system. It entrenched it further. Creditors demanded harsher terms, more control, more access, more assurance. Spain agreed. What made this arrangement fatal was not exploitation by foreign powers, but Spain's refusal to see the danger in outsourcing its own economy. The empire became a funnel. Wealth entered at one end and flowed out the other. Little remained behind to build factories, train craftsmen, or modernize agriculture. The Spanish economy stagnated, while its rivals learned, adapted, and grew. To contemporaries, the system seemed rational. Spain was powerful. Silver was abundant. Wars were won. But beneath the surface, the agreement had done something irreversible. It taught Spain to live without making, and an empire that stops making eventually stops ruling. Silver did not destroy Spain overnight. It worked slowly like a medicine taken in the wrong dose for too long. At first, the flood of American silver masked every weakness. When domestic production fell, silver paid for imports. When tax revenue lagged, silver covered the gap. When war costs spiraled out of control, silver reassured creditors that repayment was only a shipment away. This created a dangerous illusion that Spain could buy its way out of structural problems, but silver is not productivity. It does not train workers. It does not modernize tools. It does not innovate. Worse still, the constant inflow of bullion distorted Spain's entire economy. Prices rose steadily as money became more abundant. Farmers struggled as imported grain undercut local harvests. Artisans closed their workshops when cheaper foreign goods flooded the market. Skilled labor slowly disappeared, replaced by rent-seeking and bureaucracy. Why manufacture cloth in Castile when Flemish textiles could be purchased with silver? Why invest in shipyards when Dutch fleets were faster and cheaper? Spain began exporting raw wealth and importing finished goods, a classic pattern of dependency that would later define many colonial economies. The crown responded not with reform, but with control. Guilds were protected, prices were regulated, trade was restricted, innovation was treated with suspicion, often seen as disruptive or unorthodox. Social prestige became tied to land ownership, titles, and court positions, not commerce or industry. Merchants were tolerated, not celebrated. Manufacturers were constrained, not empowered. As a result, Spain's economy became rigid precisely when flexibility was needed most. Meanwhile, Spain's rivals absorbed Spanish silver and transformed it into something far more powerful. Capital. Dutch banks refined credit systems. English merchants reinvested profits into shipbuilding and factories. Financial markets deepened. Insurance, joint stock companies, and commercial law advanced, rapidly funded, in part by Spanish money. Spain unknowingly financed the rise of its competitors. Each year, more silver left Spain than remained. Each year, more decisions were made in Genoa, Amsterdam, and London than in Madrid. The empire still ruled vast territories, but its economic center of gravity had shifted elsewhere. The poison was not silver itself. The poison was dependency. Spain had trained itself to survive on external flows rather than internal strength. When disruptions occurred, piracy, war losses, declining mine output, the system could not adapt. It had no resilience, no industrial base to fall back on, no financial independence to maneuver. By the time Spanish elites realized something was wrong, they misdiagnosed the illness. They blamed corruption, foreign enemies, moral decay, anything except the economic structure they had chosen decades earlier. The empire still looked powerful on maps, but inside, it was becoming hollow. And hollow empires do not collapse loudly. They simply stop working. Spain's economic trap might still have been escaped if peace had intervened. But peace never came. The Spanish Empire was born into conflict and matured in it. From the Italian Wars to the 80 Years' War in the Low Countries, from naval clashes with England to the endless struggle to defend Catholic dominance in Europe, Spain fought continuously for more than a century. War did not just drain silver, it pre-committed it. Each new conflict required immediate funding. Soldiers pay weapons, ships, logistics. Taxation was slow and politically dangerous. Economic reform took time. Spain believed it did not have. Borrowing, by contrast, was instant. So Spain borrowed again and again against future silver shipments. This locked the empire into a vicious cycle. Future wealth was already spent before it arrived. When fleets returned from the Americas, much of the treasure never touched Spanish soil. It went directly to creditors, transferred on paper to bankers in Genoa, Augsburg, and later Amsterdam. Spain became an empire living on advance payments. The structure of its debt made escape nearly impossible. Loans were short-term, interest was high, defaults were frequent. Each bankruptcy damaged Spain's credibility, forcing the crown to accept worse terms the next time it borrowed. Creditors demanded tighter control, more guarantees, more direct access to revenue streams. Debt became policy. By the early 17th century, the Spanish state was less a sovereign actor than a financial intermediary collecting silver only to pass it onward. Even taxation within Spain was distorted. Heavy taxes fell on Castile, the heart of the empire, while other regions were shielded. This strangled domestic demand and deepened regional inequality. Meanwhile, military spending crowded out everything else. Infrastructure decayed. Roads went unrepaired. Ports stagnated. Education and technical training were neglected. Spain fought wars using money that could have built the foundations of a modern economy while its rivals used peace, when they had it, to modernize. The most dangerous consequence of constant war was not exhaustion but rigidity. Spain could not devalue its currency without enraging creditors. It could not cut military spending without risking collapse abroad. It could not raise taxes further without provoking rebellion at home. Every option closed another door. This is what truly doomed Spain for centuries. Not a single bad decision, but a future already more. Economic flexibility, the ability to adapt to shocks, to shift strategy, to invest differently, was gone. By the time silver output began to decline in the late 17th century, the damage was already done. Spain did not face a sudden crisis. It faced a slow realization. The empire had no room left to move. It had won battles, it had signed treaties, but it had surrendered the one thing that determines long-term survival: the ability to choose a different path. Empires do not end when the fighting stops. They end when the consequences arrive. For Spain, those consequences unfolded slowly, stretching not across decades but centuries. The trade structures, debt habits, and economic assumptions forged in the 16th century did not vanish when silver declined. They hardened into tradition. By the 18th century, Spain was no longer Europe's engine, but its cautionary tale. Industries that had never been built could not be revived overnight. Regions that had been starved of investment for generations lacked skilled labor and infrastructure. Commercial culture, once dismissed as beneath aristocratic dignity, could not simply be summoned when the empire needed it most. Spain entered the modern era with an economy designed for extraction, not creation. Even when reformers recognized the problem, they faced resistance from entrenched elites who benefited from the old system. Landowners, rent-seekers, and bureaucracies opposed change. Foreign interests, long accustomed to Spanish dependency, had no incentive to loosen their grip. The consequences rippled outward. Spain lost naval dominance to Britain. It lost financial leadership to the Dutch, then the Americans. Its colonies, once tightly controlled, became economic liabilities rather than assets. When independence movements swept Latin America in the early 19th century, Spain lacked the industrial base to replace colonial revenues. The empire shattered not with a single defeat, but through exhaustion. And yet, the deeper legacy extended far beyond Spain itself. The pattern Spain pioneered: exporting raw wealth, importing finished goods. Financing consumption through debt would be repeated across the world. Later empires and developing nations would fall into similar traps, mistaking resource abundance for economic strength. Spain had lived the warning first. 300 years after the initial agreements that shaped its economy, Spain remained burdened by structural weaknesses, underinvestment, regional inequality, fragile industries, and reliance on external capital. Recovery came slowly, unevenly, and often too late to reclaim lost influence. This was not fate, it was design. The tragedy is not that Spain became poor, it never truly did. The tragedy is that it never learned to convert wealth into resilience. The trade agreement that doomed Spain was not a single document stored in an archive. It was a mindset, one that valued prestige over productivity, control over flexibility, and symbols over systems. When Spain finally abandoned that mindset, the world had already moved on. The empire had ruled the globe, but it had never learned how to rule its own economy.